Welcome to tonight's session for ISPI of Hampton Roads. I'm Scott Wersing, Director of Programs. We'll probably just go around the room, introduce yourself, your name, and your job title and where you work, and then we'll leave it off to our speaker, JD. Again, my name is Scott Wersing. I work for the Coast Guard as an instructional system specialist supporting the training center in Yorktown, where I'm currently working on a survey to determine if people are actually applying learning on the job. So I'll let you know in 6 months, once I get some more data, people are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing or not. Let's go down the list. Mark, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, I'm Mark Bowers. I'm a member of the Hampton Roads chapter and a volunteer at ISPI Global. Happily retired, very busy, zero income. It's a weird set of choices. Next.
Cindy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Cindy Pinkstaff. I'm in Chicago, Illinois. Thank you for the invitation, extended invitation. I miss my ISPI days. I am currently in transition, so also zero income, but not by choice.
Max, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Max Cropper, CEO of 5-Star Performance Solutions. I'm in Eastern Utah. I'm semi-retired. I don't know if it's by choice or not, but I sponsor best practice workshops, first principles, AI tools, performance improvement with BD&L, leadership development. I first works with Leroy Mon. Anyway, just trying to share best practices for learning development, performance improvement.
Great. Arlia, why don't you introduce yourself?
Let's get the mic down. My name is Arleah Ashburn. I'm here in Virginia Beach. I'm former performance analyst for Coast Guard ForceCom. Prior to that, did some learning and development work for the Navy as a civilian. Sounds like I'm not the only one in this group that's infected by crazy things going on with the government. Yeah, I'm also in the same boat. But good to be on this call and just, hear about what's going on in instructional design and performance improvement. And so looking forward to the discussion.
Great. Marcia, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Dr. Marcia Stewart. I'm current president of HRISPI. Although I say that, I couldn't do it without the two gentlemen on tonight. So it's because of them that we are here. I thank both of you. I currently work for Newport News Shipbuilding, and I also have my own consulting.
Great. Thanks. Becky, why don't you introduce yourself? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. I'm Becky Gunn, and I work at a company called Connexon. We were a small startup about 5 years ago, starting under 100 employees, and was hired on to do process work with a continuous improvement background, a little bit of training, and a lot of process improvement. We've now grown to 900 employees, and we help build fiber networks in rural America, trying to close that digital divide. My team, I'm a director of continuous improvement. We have a small team that does training and all of our new hire training and some of our technical training, and then also process improvement. So I'm glad to be here and excited to learn.
Great. Hey, Paul Elliott, here's an expert in accomplished performance. But introduce yourself, Paul.
How you doing, Scott?
Good to see you.
I'm semi-retired. I started a company called Exemplary Performance, did a lot of work. The only government work I've done over the years was with the Coast Guard, Arleah, but it goes back a number of years. But continue to consult with the new owner of the company, right now primarily in the pharmaceutical space.
Great, thanks. Vance, why don't you introduce yourself?
Good evening, Vance Kinsey. I work for Norfolk Naval Shipyard. I've been a performance improvement professional for many years, with most of my application currently in Lean Six Sigma process and performance improvement.
Great. Victoria, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Victoria Nelson. I'm a learning and development strategist for a cancer center in Seattle, Washington.
Great. Nadia, why don't you introduce yourself? Good. Time's up. Go to Beck. White card.
Hi. Sorry, I'm a little bit late here. We're doing introductions, correct?
Yeah, just name, company you work for, job position.
Amazing. So my name is Beck Wycard. My position is Senior Specialist Talent Programs at Monash University.
Edwin. Edwin disappeared. Nadia, back to Nadia. Come off mute if not. All right. So I'll hand over to JD to introduce himself and go on with the presentation.
Hi, everybody. I'm JD. Just want to first, thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for the invitation, Scott, to share some ideas with you all today. Thanks for everything you do, for your passion for helping people do their best work every day. And, anyone who wants to hang out with me after hours to talk about learning and development stuff means that you're really into learning and development stuff and helping people. So I greatly appreciate that. I am currently located in Orlando, Florida. More accurately, if you need to find me, find the Walt Disney World Resort and you found me. So on screen, you see what happens when I load my resume into artificial intelligence and say, generate an image that represents my professional background. So I started my career managing movie theaters and theme parks. I spent 10 years with the Walt Disney Company, where I transitioned into learning and development. I spent some time in the world of for-profit higher education contact center operations, which is exactly as exciting as it sounds. And for the last 9 years, I've been on the technology side of learning and performance enablement. So today's story, or the conversation we're going to have, and the cool thing about being a smaller group is we can make this as much of a conversation as you would like. So if you have questions or comments or what did you mean by that, feel free to either throw your hand up or drop something into the chat, and happy to make the following hour as useful to you as possible. Today's story is based on my first book, The Modern Learning Ecosystem, which if you find it very interesting, I'm currently giving away a copy on my LinkedIn account. So here's my interesting links in the chat. If you go to my LinkedIn account and you scroll back in my posts, basically you just have to share a comment that says, what's your recommendation for someone who's getting into L&D for the first time? And then next Friday, the big shopping day, I'm just going to pick somebody and ship a copy of the book to somebody. So thanks so much for hanging out. Let's dive. Does anyone need anything? Everyone good? Prepared? Let's dive in. So I like starting this particular conversation with a question for everybody. So if you do have the chat handy, it's a good place to answer this particular question so everyone doesn't come off mute simultaneously. What's your perspective on the biggest challenge facing L&D today? Think about your function, your organization, the profession at large. What's the biggest challenge you find that's facing L&D today? To be or not to be AI, according to Scott. Max says, helping to achieve performance. Demonstrating value. Will people actually use what they are learning? Scott mentioned that you're looking into that right now. Finding the right skills to help those whose jobs will be replaced by AI. Very timely conversation. I like to ask this particular question in a lot of sessions that I do. I have the opportunity to speak to a lot of different people in a lot of different parts of the world. And there are certain things I like to learn or kind of get a pulse check on when it comes to how we're thinking about the work that we do and the profession in which we work. And when I ask the question about, over the years, I've asked this question, what's the biggest challenge facing L&D today? There are two things I regularly hear. So two very popular responses. And then one thing I never really hear about. So one that I always hear is the pace of change. I'll look towards the AI comments in regards to how things are changing quickly around us and the challenge that we have trying to keep up with stakeholders knocking on the door, the next KPI or priority in the business, reshaping of and resizing of organizations, just the sheer pace of change and trying to help the people we support keep pace with that change with our limited time and resources. I've still never met the learning and development team, by the way, that has all of the time and all of the money. Never met that organization. And I work with a couple hundred companies right now. The next one I hear a lot about is time. The fact that the whole do more with less idea has very much gripped the workplace at an international level over the last couple of years. And people get pushback in the L&D function. And I heard it decades ago when I got started in the industry as a practitioner. I would get pushback from stakeholders or operational managers who said, quote, "We don't have time for learning," which is a funny statement unto itself, given the fact that people are constantly learning and evolving and changing. It's less they don't have time for learning. It's more they don't have time for the thing that I'm asking them to do at this particular moment, because there are other issues going on that are more directly related to the things for which they are held accountable. So I regularly hear about or have conversations about the pace of change and then how that impacts the available time people have to engage in any type of activity that supports performance and development. But I think the biggest challenge facing L&D today is a challenge we've been facing for a long time, and I don't think we've necessarily come to grips with it or had this conversation, and that's legacy. L&D is one of the most interesting professions in the workplace, largely because everyone has an opinion on how we do what we do. In your organization, do you have a really deeply held opinion on how the accountants do what they do? No, they account, right? They're experts in their field. You let them do what they do. Meanwhile, people knock on your door and say, "We need a 45-minute training that covers the following 250 slides, and I need it next Thursday." And you're sitting there wondering, where'd you get 45 minutes from? Because everyone has some type of an experience when it comes to education. They went to school, or they had a training that one time that they really liked, and they would like to see us do it again or cover that particular topic, because of course, that's what's going to fix everything that's going on within their team or the organization. And we know, because we're hanging out on a Thursday evening with me, we're into this stuff. We understand that classrooms usually aren't the solution, that everything's not a training problem, that learning at work, yet alone learning in everyday life, does not look like school. But that doesn't mean that everyone else that we work with, whether it be frontline employees, whether it be corporate executives, or everyone in between, doesn't mean they understand that or they care to understand that. And what's interesting is when you take a look at some of the data around how L&D and HR functions are trying to move forward, what the future of these functions looks like, one of the biggest conversations, second to AI, related to AI, is the skills conversation. Lots of organizations for the past 5 to 6 years have been trying to make a transition to a skills-based talent strategy. Rather than it be about job descriptions and course completions, it's about understanding what people can do and aligning work with the skills of people. Great. Not a lot of organizations have been hugely successful with making that transition. And when you ask why they're not successful, you see numbers like I have on screen right now. And you see some expected challenges you might run into in trying to make the change to skills as the focus of how you make workplace decisions. You've got complexity, you got insufficient data, you might not have the right technology. But what's really interesting is when you isolate 3 of the 4 biggest challenges, they're the same 3 things I just talked about. The inability to prioritize, changing needs of the organization, but at the top of the list is the legacy perspective people have about how work works. And that makes it fundamentally challenging to move the ball, even if moving it would be beneficial to everyone in the workplace. So the question becomes, if our goal is to help everyone that we support have the best possible chance at doing their best work every day, which is what I believe learning and development fundamentally is about, how do we change the perspective of the people we support, the people we work with, the stakeholders and subject matter experts we engage with, the organization overall, to think differently about what learning and development is, and as a result, what learning and development as a function can do and the value that we can provide? That's what I'd like to talk about today. I'll pause. Any questions, comments, concerns so far as we dive in? We're good. Stunned silence. So to dig into how do we evolve from a legacy perspective that learning looks like school, it's about courses and completions, to a world where we're effectively enabling people to do their best work every day, there are 3 things I find at the core of the conversation. 1's mindset, 2 systems, 3 influence. We'll dig into each of these individually, starting with mindset. Coming back to what I just said, how should we think? When I say we need to evolve past this legacy perspective of what people think learning at work is, well, what is learning at work, right? How do we define what this function is and what value we can provide in today's version of work? Now, I find that in organizations, when you talk about their learning and development function, a lot of organizations are out of balance. And by that, I mean they're focused on one of 2 areas. There's disruption, the today of it, the next business problem, the next knock on the door from a stakeholder, trying to solve whatever is the number for this quarter. So chasing the day-to-day is one side. On the other side is future, preparing for tomorrow, career building and pathing, skill development. Those things are going to set people and the organization up for the future. And I find most organizations are out of balance. They're focused on one side or the other. Their systems and tools are built for one side or the other. Their mindset is focused on one side or the other. And coincidentally, if learning and development is part of the HR function, they tend to be focused on future, opportunity, career development. If they align to the operations team, they tend to be focused on day-to-day because that's how the operation is measured. So how do we restore balance to the learning function of an organization in order to try to move forward so that we're not thinking about learning in a traditional sense? And I look to potentially the most influential character of the past 100 years for this answer, a true heavy thinker, right? Someone who thinks completely differently than anyone here. The answer is Wile E. Coyote. Why Wile E. Coyote? Follow me here. This is going to take a few minutes. Is anyone not familiar with Wile E. Coyote? It's so funny to me that I have asked that question on 3 different continents, and no one has ever said, I've never heard of Wile E. Coyote. Side note, Wile E. Coyote movie coming out next year. We could talk about that later if you would like. So Wile E. Coyote, out in the desert, hungry, chasing the Roadrunner. Roadrunner's very fast, so Wile E. Coyote has a really hard time catching said Roadrunner. So what does he do? He makes plans, right? He calls Acme. He has all of the coolest gadgets and technology. This should work. He's attached to a slingshot wearing rocket skates. This should go well for Wile E. Coyote. What happens at the end of every Wile E. Coyote cartoon? He ends up at the bottom of a cliff with an anvil on his head. Now I ask you, have you ever felt like Wile E. Coyote? You had the plan, you had the content, you had the technology. The executive team was bought in. And then something changed. A champion left, a business priority shifted, something went sideways, and all of a sudden, you had to go back to zero. You had to start again. You feel like you fell off a cliff with an anvil on your head because you keep kind of going around in circles and circles. Now, how do we overcome the challenge of Wile E. Coyote? Well, I've got one more piece of the Wile E. Coyote story for you. See, in some Wile E. Coyote cartoons, he has a particular tactic that he uses. He goes up to the side of a cliff and he paints a fake tunnel on the side of the cliff. And the idea is that the Roadrunner, silly, is going to think that's a tunnel, run straight into the wall, knocked out, easy to catch the Roadrunner. What actually happens is the Roadrunner runs straight through the tunnel. Coyote's very confused, comes out into the road to see what happened, gets hit by a truck coming the other direction. What should we take away from this? Wile E. Coyote can paint tunnels that turn into real tunnels. So what should he have done? Instead of chasing the Roadrunner, he should have taken that very lucrative skill, sold it to the government for a ton of money, and just bought food. It's a stupid metaphor. It is indeed. But I think there's an interesting takeaway in the story of Wile E. Coyote, in the fact that to solve the problem and overcome kind of the legacy challenges that he was facing, he had to just look at what he was capable of doing and apply his skills in a different way. And the same is true in learning and development. And what I call adopting a modern learning mindset, where it's not about getting rid of legacy practices. It's not about not building courses or not facilitating classroom sessions. Nothing stops, nothing goes away. But we in the organization have to shift the way we think about our tactics and our practices and our technologies and apply them in a way that best aligns with both the needs of the organization as well as the people that we support. So I've broken down kind of 6 ideas or 6 principles of the modern learning mindset that I use to try to define, well, what should learning and development feel like in an organization today? And then one thing that's consistent throughout this conversation is that how you bring this to life will vary based on your organization's resources, tools and technologies, skills of your learning and development team, needs and kind of the context and everyday environment of your workforce. A lot of different things go into how you bring these ideas to life. But I think it's important that as learning and performance practitioners, we have kind of a consistent set of principles that align our work, and then we bring them to life in the best way possible for the people we're trying to help. So those 6 ideas of what should learning at work look and feel like? How do we need people to think about it instead of it being the traditional course-based approach? 1, learning needs to be part of the work, not just the workflow. We in L&D love the buzzy term, learning in the flow of work. It's one of our favorites. I think it falls short because it's not just about making things available or more easily available inside of the way people are doing their jobs. I do a lot of work with frontline employees in grocery, hospitality, retail, logistics, manufacturing environments. That's where I spend most of my time. And it's definitely a great idea to be able to help a grocery store associate be able to access information closer to where they do their job every day. But just because you can access something, just because you can log into a learning management system, doesn't mean you have the time or the prioritization to do it. So how do we help the organization go beyond the idea of, well, just making things available in the flow of work and actually aligning the concept of development to the job itself, so it's just as important as another job-related task? So one, we have to think that way about learning. It's part of the work. Two, we need people to think about the broader ecosystem. My book is called The Modern Learning Ecosystem for a reason. I believe we limit ourselves when we only apply the tools, tactics, and technologies that we own as a learning and development function. There's just a frank reality that a learning management system is not part of most people's lives. The average employee doesn't sit down and think to themselves, I should check out what's new in the LMS today. That's just not how people behave, especially in an environment where they have limited time and they're trying to keep pace with change. So how do we broaden our perspective? When I supported L&D and contact centers, one of the most important things I ever did was start shifting content out of our LMS into our knowledge base, which was a wiki, which was the tool where we documented all of our processes. We documented all of the products that people were talking about on the phone, because that's where people lived. That's where people did the job. I had to find a way to use tools that gave me better reach and helped me embed support into the process of work rather than asking people to come to me. Because again, limited time, lots going on. It's really hard to get people's attention, yet alone the time they need to really focus on their development. So expanding the ecosystem. Number three is a data conversation. If you want to talk about AI, we have to talk about data first. So how do we get more savvy with data so that we're using it to inform where we spend our limited time and resources, rather than simply responding to the loudest stakeholder or being forced to take the order that people request, the 45-minute course next Thursday, because we don't have the right data to push back and say, well, the actual problem is, or training's not going to fix this particular issue. So how do we advance our data practices so we can make informed decisions and recommendations? Number four, we're going after an equitable experience at scale. I'm going to say a couple of different times. It's not about learning for the sake of learning. I believe we now have the capability, the tools, technology, whether it be mobile technology, digital learning and content, whether it be AI related. We have the ability to reach people. We have the ability to translate content in ways that even a year ago we couldn't. And we left a lot of people behind because people often have to make a decision about how many languages do we support in content. And you don't know how many people you're leaving behind because they're just struggling to understand information, yet alone actually learn and apply it. So how do we rethink our strategies to shoot for equity instead of focusing on completions? The next idea is about impact. It's not about learning. It's about solving meaningful, measurable business problems. There's a lot of conversations. I'm not a huge fan of it around the seat at the table thing. I have a really hard time saying seat at the table without accidentally air quoting seat at the table. It just happens. I'm not trying to, because we tend not to think in terms of impact, or we struggle to reach impact. There's the whole ROI conversation. I don't think ROI and impact are the same thing. So how are we making sure that we're focused on the priority problems of the organization that we support, and we have the relationships necessary to be able to go after the right problems again, instead of having to listen to the loudest stakeholder? And then finally, I believe a modern learning mindset brought to life, one of the greatest tools it provides to the organization is agility, the ability to react to whatever the next thing might be. Interesting moment. I wrote my book during the pandemic. In the middle of 2020, I stopped writing because I started wondering, is this relevant? Like, is this what people need right now? And I went on a bit of a listening tour. And I talked to different L&D professionals in different industries in different parts of the world. And I just wanted to know how they were doing. Like, how were they managing their way through the particular challenge? And like I said, I work with a lot of frontline workers, and frontline workers were still on site, on the job in a lot of cases. So I was wondering how they were managing their way through it, keeping pace with change, keeping people feeling capable and confident in their jobs. And what I realized very quickly was, one, this idea of expanding our perspective and expanding the ecosystem was becoming more relevant. And two, the organizations that were dealing with this level of change the best were the ones that had committed to evolving their strategies in the years prior to that change and had recognized the importance of having the right tools and tactics in place to be able to handle the next thing. They were the types of organizations or industries that had constant large-scale change, and they just happened to be able to turn those mechanisms in this direction at this moment, facing a very unexpected situation. So how do we foster persistent organizational agility? Because we never know what's coming next, and neither do the people that we support. So how do we put the right tools and systems in place so people can manage their way through? And when you put all, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So going back to those 6, you've talked to a lot of people. Which one's the easiest mindset to grasp for people?
I find the one that is, I wouldn't say it's easiest. I'd say right now there's just a natural evolution taking place is the second item, the evolution of the ecosystem. And let's reference AI. AI is a meaningful unlock to breaking out of technology silos across an organization. There are a lot of tools being put in place by different parts of the business that look a lot like learning technology. Chatbots, as an example. You've run into a lot of chatbots right now. We have I see sales teams that are implementing digital assistants for their sales organization so that they can help people come up to speed with complex and changing product information a lot faster. They're doing it because it's going to help them have a great sales conversation, especially with a complex product. That looks a lot like performance support to me. It's not an L&D function that's necessarily doing it. It's the sales team. So there's a lot of kind of breaking down of silos taking place in the technology space because AI is enabling this consolidation of tools along with economic factors that do more with less factor. So there's a lot of things, a confluence of activities coming together to expand the story to say, we don't need a dedicated learning technology to help people learn. Maybe it's part of the story. It's part of our systems. It's a part of how we collect data because regulators still exist and compliance still exists. But there's a greater tool set out there that can help us, one, get closer to the people who are doing the job, and two, better align with other functions that might own those tools. So that's the one I see kind of naturally coming to life in more organizations today, while some of the other ones are still a conversation. Good question.
I see the hardest one is that agility. It goes back to your scale. Your organization either is trying to put out a fire today or is thinking about the future. And most organizations are just trying to put out a fire today. And then when something like COVID happens, they don't know how to handle those kind of key things. And I think that's something to really think about if you're, in the company, if you're in the company you're working at, where, are they putting out fires? Are they trying to figure out, how to get to the future? I think that's a good thing to look at.
Yeah, and if you look at different versions of skill gaps existing or conversations existing in the workplace today, some of them are based on the fact that organizations fail to put any type of long-term investment into continuing to build skills, or they relied on other factors to bring in skilled talent. Some of the retailers that I work with historically had just hired people who specialize in their products. Maybe they sell farm equipment. They just hired people who were familiar with farm equipment, people who worked on farms. And then they started to run out of those people based on just the availability of that talent skill set, the change in that particular marketplace or that particular region. And suddenly they're trying to figure out, well, how do I build a level of knowledge and capability that I was just inheriting that was built over years of practical experience? So that's where it comes down to the idea of what we're talking about next is putting the systems in place that allow us that level of flexibility so that when the next example, AI, comes in, we're not left trying to educate people around AI by saying, play with it and see what you learn, which is an amazing number of organizations' AI education strategy right now is, people are using it. They'll figure out how it works. They'll all adapt their workflows themselves and build their own tools. I always look at that and wonder, where are these people finding this time to develop their own custom AI tools? It sounds great on paper. It doesn't work in practice until the organization meaningfully puts priorities and systems in place to make it part of the job, hence the first bullet, as opposed to people just having to find ways to navigate themselves forward. Great question. So that sums up for L&D. For me, it means, as I mentioned already, the meaningful change I believe that must happen, especially in an AI-enabled workplace, it's about moving out of the way. It's about getting out of the middle of the conversation. Instead of having to be the team that builds and delivers as the core function of L&D. Doesn't stop. We still build and deliver. But instead of that being our focus, it's moving from content to connections. Ensuring that we have the systems in place that allow us to scale support, scale learning and performance. Because again, we don't have all the time and all the money, constantly changing workplace, a lot of conflicting demands from stakeholders. We can only go so far. And back to my time in contact centers, that was kind of my breaking point, was when I realized I was building Captivate module after Captivate module after Captivate module. And I just had that moment where I realized I can't keep up. I don't have enough resources. I have a limited number of people on my team. This business is changing at an unpredictable rate. I have to do something different. And it's what sent me on the path to talk to y'all today. So how do we become stronger connectors as a learning and development function? That brings us to point number 2, systems. I'll pause to see if there are any additional questions about mindset.
JD, I have a question. As you talk about the complexities in which we're operating, which I think we're certainly aware of, is part of the complexity, maybe that's not the right word. If we segment learning and development from elevating performance, which would include everything from process improvement to hiring to compensation models, et cetera, et cetera. Does that segmentation help?
I don't know if this is an answer to your question, but I find that the further away from the day-to-day job we get, the harder it is to justify and sustain the value of an enablement function.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason why HR-related functions struggle when organizations start to make tough decisions. It's too easy for people to make that decision because they're too far removed from not just what the value that different functions provide, but their capability, right? What they can contribute, especially in a changing organization that is going to adopt a new business model or whatever is facilitating a difficult decision. So for me, it becomes a question of how do we get closer to the work and the problems that organizations prioritize by expanding what we bring to the table in terms of the tools, tactics, and technologies we can offer to solve the problem. If I could control the world, I'm not sure if I'm able to control the world, but if I could control the world, I would stop using the word learning a lot, and I would start using the word help a lot more. Because that's how I've, for 10 years at this point, thought about what I do. My job is just to help people do their job well. What I do in order to get to that goal can wildly vary. And if I'm able to bring a lot to the table in terms of how I can help, whether it's we have to change the process, we have to introduce new tools, someone does have to learn something new, or I just need to get them the information they need to make a smart decision, I'm bringing more of a toolkit to the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I can help solve more problems, find different ways to solve those problems, and deliver value in different ways. I find it's when we get very structured and rigid in terms of responsibility and function, and the further that gets removed from the people who are making decisions about how work works, that's where disconnects start to occur. Learning culture breaks apart, and you kind of have to force the organization to relearn the importance of L&D, which happens on cycles, right? Like it's employees are very important, development's very important. Something changes in the economic landscape, it's no longer important. Give it a couple of years. We're growing again. People are very important, skills are very important, and that cycle continues. How do you break the cycle? You have to be seen differently by decision makers, and that's where we're headed.
So there's a second part to the question, and then I'll zip my lip. But the second part of the question is when you are interacting with this range of clients with whom you work, if the equipping function, call it learning, development, performance improvement, whatever you call it, if that equipping function is part of the operational team they're supporting as compared to a corporate entity called HR or L&D within HR, do some of these issues get resolved more easily in your experience?
Almost every time I find that L&D functions, whatever they're called, that align up into operational entities, whether it be a sales enablement team, the COO, in past roles, I've primarily reported into someone who reports to a chief operating officer. I've rarely reported to a CHRO or chief people officer. I've always been kind of an operational entity. And when I've asked similar questions of people, I consistently find there's a stronger link, stronger relationships, and a stronger conversation when people are tied directly to the operations. Because one, they're held accountable and measured in a similar way. They're part of that bigger conversation. But the way they talk is also different.
Yep. That's my experience too. That's
Yeah.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. I find ops oriented or people, ops focused L&D people a lot of times also come from operations, which is where I'm born. I managed frontline teams and then became L&D versus coming from the L&D side of the fence. I just happen to have a complementary skill set. But I find operations focused L&D teams talk more like product management teams than they talk like HR professionals. And I think it's just because you're in a different rhythm of conversation. You're focused on different topics. You're focused on KPIs that the teams that you're supporting are held accountable to. It just shifts the conversation in meaningful ways. It shouldn't. Like, we should be able to work cross-functionally and be able to support and prioritize and align and all of these different things. But I think anyone who's ever worked in any type of large entity understands how difficult that is in real life when politics and power and all of that kind of stuff come into play. Good thoughts. Thanks. Systems. So how do we bring the mindset to life? We have to take a systems approach to learning and development. I refer to it as the operating system of learning and performance in the organization. For too many organizations, this diagram represents learning strategy. We create something based on a request or an order from a stakeholder. We deliver. So whether it's something that goes into a learning management system, an activity that takes place in real life, hands-on job training, classroom session, webinar, what have you. The activity is complete. Survey, post-test, people have learned, moving on to the next topic. I find most L&D professionals don't think this is a satisfactory version of enabling people to do their best work. But again, legacy perspective of organizations tends to limit us to this particular version of learning. What we have to get across, both in our practices as well as the organization's mindset, is that, again, learning is not a place and time activity. We understand that. It's an always-on system of work. That first bullet, learning is part of work. So how do we make learning more like water in your home? You can tell I enjoy stretched metaphors. If you look at the plumbing in your home, it brings the water where it needs it, where you need it in order to accomplish different tasks. You're watering the lawn, making food in the kitchen, washing your hands in the restroom. It's just there when you need it. And you rely heavily on the plumbing. People love air fryers. You might have an air fryer. You might love your air fryer. If your air fryer breaks and your plumbing breaks, which one are you paying to fix? Plumbing, because it's an essential part of our ability to live our day-to-day lives in an environment such as the one I'm sitting in right now. So how do we make learning feel more like the water of the workplace? Well, let's break down what learning can mean in the workplace. I believe, regardless of what you do, where you work, what industry you're in, what part of the world you're in, we can break down what we do to 6 fundamental things. There are 6 things that people need to be able to accomplish the goal I mentioned earlier, which is do their best work every day. It begins with they need updated information. They need to know what's going on so they can make a smart, informed decision as part of their day-to-day work. They need the updates. Number 2, they need core job skills. They need to understand what's expected of them to do this job, what knowledge and skill they need to perform their day-to-day tasks. Number 3, they need access to help. Right? If I don't know how to solve this problem, I've never seen this one before, where do I go to get that kind of support? Number 4, they need someone telling them how they're doing. They need feedback on if they're meeting their expectations and coaching on how to improve their performance. Number 5, they need practice. They need a chance to refine. It's not just learn something, go out and do it, make mistakes, and hope it's not a big problem, especially in a safety critical, compliance heavy environment. They need a chance to refine, practice their skills to make sure when they go out to do it for real, they're ready. And number 6, they need a chance to do more, to continue to expand their skills, whether it's in service of the role they're currently in or to pursue a promotion, to move across somewhere else in the organization, wherever they're looking to go. So I find if you can break L&D functionally down to those 6 key areas, and then how do we bring these 6 key areas to life when and where people need them, as if it's the water of the workplace. Well, let's do a graphing exercise first. If you have paper and a pen, you graph along if you would like. Otherwise, you can take a screenshot and do it later. Those 6 ideas are the blocks on the right side of the screen. So again, 6 principles. We need to bring these to life in a way that enables people to do their best work. Let's stack the blocks, but we're going to do it in a little bit of a different way. We're going to stack them from the bottom to the top based on how we tend to prioritize them in the workplace learning and development. The things we put at the bottom are going to be the stuff we spend the most time and effort on. We're kind of building the house of learning and development. The foundation, the stuff we do the most, up to the stuff that we do the least. When I do this exercise with various L&D professionals, the picture tends to turn to something like this. The structured side of learning and development, required training, job training, additional career development, those types of things, tend to sit at the bottom where we spend most of our time and resources. And things like performance support, practice, and reinforcement, things we do a little bit less often. When you add one more dimension to this picture, availability, how easy is it for the average person to be able to take advantage of these different tools, tactics, and technologies? The picture changes to look something like this. The things that are easier for people to take advantage of tend to be the things that we do the least or spend the least amount of time and resources on, where the things that are harder to take advantage of, structured training as an example, are the things that we commit a lot of resources to and we get asked for a lot. And if you were to add physics to this slide, like they were blocks sitting on your desk, something like this would start to happen. And that's what happens in a lot of organizations. You might have a grand plan that includes a lot of different tools and tactics, but oftentimes we get limited down to the structured version of training. People don't retain what they might have learned or at least consumed during that activity. They struggle to apply it. No one's there to provide the right feedback. Things don't change. People come back and say, we need more training. Constant cycle of life in workplace learning and performance. So how do we change the mix? How do we restructure the strategy to better align with what these people need? Because we're trying to provide an equitable experience where everyone has a chance to do their best work. Like I said in the beginning, it's not about throwing anything away. It's just about restructuring the blocks, restacking the pieces in a way that makes more sense for the people we're trying to help, as opposed to the things that we have historically done or the way our organization thinks from a legacy perspective. So this framework I call the modern learning ecosystem, hence the title of the book. The idea here is that both in the way that you architect your strategy, as well as the way that you determine what solution makes sense to solve a problem, we're going to rebuild our structure from the bottom to the top. Here's what I mean, then I'll pause to see if you have questions or thoughts or feedback. At the base of our model is shared knowledge. Access to reliable information fundamentally changes the entire conversation about performance in the workplace. In my contact center operations role, I was constantly getting asked for those e-learning modules. I was building silly amounts of e-learning to try to support 10,000 people in distributed contact centers. And then I started to walk around the contact centers and just ask contact center agents, what were they struggling with? What challenges did they have? What was getting in their way of having a great conversation? And more often than not, what I found was people were just lacking information. I was getting requests for training over and over again. A lot of it was derived from the fact that people just couldn't find the answer when they needed it. So we were pushing information at people rather than using people's natural, what I call Google reflex, to be able to find information if it's well curated and organized and people can just access it. So I started to shift our strategy. I implemented that wiki that I mentioned earlier, a knowledge base where you could go to find information. And then I started pushing back on stakeholders. So when they asked me, can you build training on this? The first thing I would say in reply was, what information is available on this topic that people can access while they're doing their job? And more often than not, the answer was, I don't know. Or the information was, in a SharePoint folder no one had updated in the last 15 years. That kind of stuff was happening. When I started to take a shared knowledge first approach to learning and development, my training requests dropped by about 50% over time. Because people started to realize you can solve a lot of problems just by making information available to people. And now with AI, it's becoming that much easier to be able to decipher the SharePoint challenge of where does the information actually live and just get people to the answer they need or the guidance they need to be able to do their job. So it fundamentally changes the story when we start there. It doesn't solve every problem. You can't look up everything. If you have a safety critical job, you can't look up how to do the procedure before you do the procedure every single time. That's inefficient, potentially dangerous. So how do you level up from making information available? The next layer, performance support. Maybe I can find the information. I don't understand how to use it, or I just don't know where to look. I can't find it. How do I raise my hand and ask for help? Again, AI right now is kind of blurring the lines between what access to information means and the ability to engage directly with that information and ask questions about it. Couldn't ask questions of a job aid 4 years ago. Now you can. In some cases, it might be a low-tech solution. One of the things I did in one of my previous organizations was I took my subject matter expert list that I used as L&D and published it to the company. So instead of people going to their manager who didn't know what was going on or coming to me for things, they just knew who the experts were inside of the organization. That scaled performance support in a way that I couldn't handle as a central L&D function. Like I said, bringing these ideas to life looks different in every organization, but there's a persistent need in terms of if I'm going to do my best work, these are the things that are going to help me get there before we get to, oh, we need to develop a structured program or course to solve our problem. Moving up, the next layer, we're going to pass an important line. It's the need to know, nice to know line. So far, we've talked about the kind of things that people can look up on the job. No one's going to understand every product that your company sells or remember every protocol in the standard operating procedure. So there's certain things they need to be able to access on the job. Then there's certain things they need to remember because it's that important, critical, compliance, safety. Don't click the link in the email, all of those types of things, right? That's why the next layer up is reinforcement. How do we make sure people have a chance to practice applying what they learn so they retain the right information and it's ready to be applied in the moment, regardless of when they were first received that information, especially in an onboarding scenario, right? How much information gets pushed at someone when they first get hired on the job? And how many other things are they thinking about when they start with an organization? In a frontline capacity, you're just thinking about what kind of shoes do I need to buy so I can work in this place in a non-slip capacity, yet alone they're trying to tell me about all the different products that I'm going to try to sell as part of this business. So how do we help people practice and refine their knowledge over time rather than think, well, we can just push information to people and they're going to remember it, because that's just not how memory works. I use scenario-based questions a lot. So I'll trigger scenario-based questions at frontline employees in different roles through different devices in order to get people to pull information out of their head, recall that information, challenge them to apply that information. And then if they get a question right, I know they have an understanding of that topic. If they get the question wrong, it's not a test, it's a learning activity, right? It's a chance to practice applying and then figure out, well, where's an individual struggling on a particular topic. So it could be as simple as practice questions. At Disney, I used to walk up to cast members all the time and ask them specific safety questions. And it wasn't just, did you know the answer? It's how fast did you know the answer? Because I need you to know this information so you can make a good decision. So giving people a chance to practice before they have to apply that critical need to know information in real life. 3 more layers. This is the coaching layer. This is where management gets involved. The people that are directly shoulder to shoulder. It could be a peer trainer, could be a supervisor, could be a manager. How are we enabling them to become part of the learning experience? It's not just the knowledge or skill to be an effective coach. It's do they have an understanding of what their people know and don't know? Where their people are potentially struggling and where they're really good at the job. And there's additional opportunity there. So I find it's often an important role that L&D can play to get those insights to managers, because managers have a lot going on, competing priorities, can't spend all of their time with all of the different team members. What's the right conversation to have with the right person at the right time? So nudge managers in the right direction using data. And then the last 2 layers are the things L&D is most familiar with. It's the structured side of training, whether it's something that I pull on demand or something that we push at people and require, whether it's compliance related, core job skills, what have you. So the idea behind this framework is that when you're trying to solve a problem that's performance related, we start at the bottom and we only go as far up in the pyramid as we need to. Because if we can provide access to information that people can pull on demand and a way for them to raise their hand, and that's all people really need, which I found to be true in my contact center role, that's where we stop. But if people need to remember certain information, we might go further. If there's a compliance requirement or the topic is just really complex and people are going to need a lot of activity, they're going to need dedicated time to work through a particular challenge, we might go all the way up in the framework. But the key is you never start at the top. You should always start at the bottom and build all the way to the top if you need all of the different layers in place. Because I still do not believe any human being on planet Earth has ever gone back into an e-learning module they completed 6 months ago to look up a piece of information that they forgot. That is just not a thing that happens. So if you build structured training, you still need available shared knowledge so people can pull information when they need it, a way to go and ask for help, a way to practice to remember the things that came out of that class that they're supposed to be able to retain, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the idea behind the modern learning ecosystem framework. I'll pause again to see what questions you might have.
One of the things that stands out for me in this structure is it's not technology dependent. All the
Nope.
examples you gave are more of person to person rather than person to technology.
And you can, like I said, what I find to be persistent are the principles and the layers themselves. How that's brought to life through different types of tools and tactics and technologies can vary wildly based on what's available to you. And like I said, AI is changing the story, which is why I wrote this book. The book came out the day before ChatGPT released. So it was one of those, oh, well, things might be different now kind of moments for me. And then 2 months later, I wrote a 12,000 word addition to the book, which is available on my website. If anyone wants the AI chapter, there's an modern learning ecosystem meets AI. It's very much like an old movie where it's like the Three Stooges meet Hercules. It's modern. That was a really old reference. The modern learning ecosystem meets AI. So AI is changing it, but the principles don't change. It's just how they're brought to life have evolved. Any other questions or comments or feedback?
So I'm wondering what other performance factors, and performance improvement factors that you consider. This is learning and development and kind of skills development. What other factors influence performance?
I need a little bit more to understand.
So there are many factors that influence performance: teamwork, leadership.
Oh yeah.
Culture, processes.
Yeah.
Systems. You've talked a little bit about systems.
Yeah.
Resources. A lot of these really deal with resources. Employee commitment and character.
Motivation. The quality of the manager, right, is a major one.
Oh yeah, the manager.
Yeah.
good managers. Anyway,
yeah.
I'm just thinking about, what about things that go beyond learning and development that affect performance?
Sure. My very unsatisfying answer is that I did not try to boil the ocean. So there's a lot of other factors to go into play when someone knocks on the door and says, we need training on. So I did not try to tackle every possible kind of environmental factor, kind of the exposure, education, environment side of the conversation. Those elements are mentioned in my book, but I kind of narrowed myself down to, we need people to be capable of performing. How do we go there? It'd be a much thicker book if I tried to go after the rest.
And also, what about higher strategic level skills?
So I talk about, I don't have it in this presentation, but I do talk about kind of a set of criteria to help determine how high in this framework do you go based on various factors. I kind of mentioned complexity as one of them. Timeliness, right? If the answer is when do we need a solution yesterday? Well, I'm obviously not going deep into this framework and going all the way up to different types of tactics. So the kind of the criticality, what's the impact if someone's unable to perform, doesn't have the knowledge and skill, as well as complexity. How difficult is it for a person to typically be able to figure out how to do what we're doing? And I tend to take a task-based approach to learning and development as opposed to a skill-based approach, because I can measure a task. I can define what's required to complete a task. Skills start to get really confusing really quickly, especially in an environment where they're really not well defined. I do have the benefit of when you work with frontline employees, their work tends to be very well documented and very well measured and very well defined. So it's easy to kind of wrap strategy around it. In corporate environments, let's take a silly example, presentation skills. What are good presentation skills? How do you define? How do you measure presentation skills? How do you help every single person develop their unique capability around presentation skills? There's certain commonalities and different traits and tactics that you can apply and help people kind of elevate in that general area, but it's squishy from a skill perspective. So I try to help people kind of navigate through that, but there's just kind of a certain reality that It comes down to how well defined is the work and the expectations and what's required to complete the work. And then how can we support the execution of the work based on what people need to be able to do to support it? Again, I think it's an unsatisfying answer.
Well, no, what you've identified is extremely significant. So
thank you.
I'm
gonna capture that quote and I'm gonna put it on all of my websites.
Because for learning and development, and and from basic accomplishments, this is really significant. But I'm always asking the additional question. Well, Scott and I have done presentations on asking the hard questions, and and so this needs to be done for, okay, how do you achieve performance, beyond learning and development? And that's another question for a different book.
Absolutely. If anything about me motivates me to do a third book, maybe I head in that direction. I might call you. So go ahead.
Oh, could you go a little further on the knowledge sharing? And if you use specific tools, is it enterprise-wide, or you see it work better within a specific function? Or could you just go deeper on that one?
Sure. Again, it's going to be an all over the place type of an answer. It really ultimately depends on how is the work done? Where do people do the job? And then what information is necessary to help them perform in that job? So it's rarely a situation where everyone in a company does the jobs the exact same way using the exact same devices, and as a result requires all of the same information. So if I always use grocery stores as examples because not everyone works in grocery, but we've all been there. So if you work in the corporate office in a grocery chain, you have a very different type of job and way of working and different access to devices than someone who works in the produce department. We also don't have the same knowledge requirements, the same job requirements, you don't complete the same tasks. So in some cases, a certain tool like an intranet or a Google Drive or a Microsoft Teams and OneDrive situation might be perfectly fine to support the person in the corporate office. The person working in the produce department usually has no access to those types of tools or can't manage their way through those tools in a particular way. So it might be a different knowledge base that supports that individual. And then the question is, how do we make sure that it's easy to manage and maintain and curate amongst different tools, and we're not just recreating the world a lot? The good news is that, again, back to the AI conversation, AI is helping us sift through that a bit more strategically, because in a world where previously I had to think about, well, how do we manage two different bases of knowledge? Do we have a central content management system? How does that work? Now I'm getting to a point where, we can actually have one shared knowledge base, but the AI and the large language model and the rules wrapped around it actually handle a lot of that filtering for me, so that if two different people in two different parts of the company ask the same question, we can now give them a different answer based on our understanding of their particular needs and requirements, because they may not be allowed to see certain information, or we just might need to contextualize information because of how they do their job, or we might even change reading level. We might translate into different languages. So there's a lot of ways we're able to parse knowledge bases now. And I'll end with this because we're running short on time. The biggest problem I find happening when it comes to this type of conversation with AI-based knowledge assistants or digital assistants and chatbots and things like that, it's not the AI side. It's the fact that most organizations haven't really cared a whole bunch about curating information for the last 20 to 25 years, and they just have stuff everywhere. So like ChatGPT, as an example, can plug into your Google Drive. If you use Google Drive, do you want that to happen? Or is there just a lot of information that may or may not be finished, relevant, updated, approved, flying around inside of the organization? And the unfortunate reality is that the machines can't really understand that that's a PowerPoint presentation from 2007 that no one should be looking at. So just like with the data side of the conversation, hi, Megan Torrance, the knowledge curation side of the conversation is what a lot of organizations have to catch up on to take advantage of what the technology is enabling when it comes to changing how people can access that information. It's all coming back around. So to start to wrap up, we've got one more point I want to hit, but when you start to apply the framework that I talked about, it completes the picture that I showed you earlier. So we still build content. We still have classroom sessions. We definitely still have hands-on job training, but now we're inserting those tactics into that always-on ecosystem where people are having an opportunity to practice get reinforcement, get the updated message, pull information when they need to from a performance support and shared knowledge perspective. And I find it's that combination, that always on system, that enables us to drive the level of agility and outcomes that organizations are looking to achieve, because that's what helps us keep pace and bend and flex with the organization, because we're not always reliant on the stuff on the left. And when we do deploy our traditional tactics, they have better outcomes because of the tactics that are in the middle of the picture. One last thing I want to hit as we run short on time is that nothing I've said matters unless the organization buys in. Because like I said, that's part of the challenge. Everyone here hanging out with me on a Thursday, we're bought in. This is the best presentation you've ever been to. It's definitely not. I just like to believe that in my little silo here. But we need other people who didn't come to this presentation to agree. And that includes the employees you're supporting, their management team, your subject matter experts, stakeholders, executives, everybody has to come on the journey. Otherwise, they're going to keep asking for a 45-minute course next Thursday. You would think they would just listen to us because we're the experts in this stuff and we're really into it and we have deep conversations about it. Tends not to be how organizational decisions are made. So the question becomes, how do we get all of those stakeholders on the same side, thinking about learning differently in the way that we do today? I have one more question to ask you before we get towards the end of our time. The question in the chat for you: who is the most challenging stakeholder in your experience to get on your side, to get buy-in from? Who is the most challenging stakeholder? Is it the executive team? Is it legal? Is it IT? Is it the management team? The employees themselves? Where do you struggle to get buy-in the most?
Almost from everyone, because they each have different understandings of the universe.
This is true as well. We can't skip anybody. I like asking who the most consistent is, because I tend to find when I do polls of this question, the same stakeholder usually wins, but I always like to see where the struggles are. But agreed. Rarely does anyone on this screen just stand up and say, yes, we will not have courses.
The immediate struggle is that the manager of the person or the person doesn't know where to go to get the help. And otherwise they could say, oh, you want to learn Excel? Go talk to John over there or Mary over there, which is how it really works in a lot of organizations.
Bob will show you how it works. I always, for some reason, call that person Bob. Bob will show you how it works. Bonus points to Megan Torrance in the chat for coming through with L&D being the most difficult stakeholder to change. I agree with that. In several previous roles, the most difficult conversations I had to have about evolving how we were doing what we were doing were often with my peer group, because it wasn't just about tactics and strategy and legacy perspective. It was about individual value. Right? If someone's job is to build a lot of e-learning content and you say, well, we need to evolve our strategy beyond building a lot of e-learning content, that person's individual value comes into question if you don't bring them along the journey to help them understand, well, how are we going to evolve together and not leave anyone behind? The one I do hear the most about is the manager. So I like to put them on the slide as the example. But the question becomes, when we're trying to influence people to think differently, I say there's a fine line between influence and manipulation. Getting people to buy in to a different way of thinking about the value we provide and how work works in a lot of ways. We have to understand the stakeholder first. This is more of a conversation about relationships than it is about learning strategy or tactics. So what does the stakeholder care about? How are they held accountable? What motivates them as individuals? What experience do they have with our function in the past? Have we helped them do their job? Helped them accomplish their goals? Or are we just kind of constantly knocking on the door asking for stuff? And what value can we provide to them as ways to turn their heads? Now, I go into deeper detail in the book. I'll mention a couple here because we're running short on time. I've developed kind of a Rolodex of tactics when it comes to trying to help people think differently about learning and development. Like I said, there's a fine line between influence and manipulation, because when everyone shifts their mindset, everyone wins in this conversation. So a couple of my favorites, the outside expert is a great one. Sometimes you want people to buy into the new strategy that you're suggesting, but they see you in a certain way. They put you in a box. Sometimes you can bring in an expert from outside the organization, someone they haven't met before, maybe from a different function inside the company, to say the exact same thing you said. And for some reason, they agree with it this time. Because again, people put people in boxes. So if they know you as, in past roles, I was known as the slide guy. So if I wasn't building slide-based content, people didn't know why I was in the conversation. I had to break that kind of mental model people had around me to open the door for me to be able to deploy different types of solutions because I was in a box, sometimes bringing in outside experts. Peer stories. I find no one wants to be L&D because they're not in L&D. They're an operations person. They're running a movie theater. They're running a contact center. They are much more likely often to listen to someone like them who does their job. So I, in a previous role, worked with a woman named Omega. She was a great champion of learning and development. She really understood what we were trying to accomplish. But even more important, she was really good at her job. People wanted to be like her and get outcomes like her and her team were achieving. So oftentimes when I wanted to introduce a new idea, bring a new solution, change the way we're doing things in training, you didn't hear from me. I ran tests and pilots with Omega and then had Omega share the outcomes that she was seeing with her team. Because again, same story coming from a different person sometimes influences people to think differently, or it connects to them in a different way than if it's coming from the learning and development guy. The last one I'll share is the yes and, my favorite influencing tactic of all time. Oftentimes, we don't have the political capital to be able to push back and say no to a stakeholder or subject matter expert. So instead of saying no, I started saying yes and, because rarely do people say no to additional stuff, extra work, extra effort. As long as it doesn't take more time or more money, they might be willing to play. I had this one exam that I had to do every year for compliance purposes. So at the same time every year, I had to take resources from my team and deploy this exam in the learning management system, chase people down to complete it. They had to get 100% in 2 attempts because of course they did. And then, generate a report with people who didn't do it or people who failed, send that to people. It was a whole thing. Meanwhile, because it was 100% passing score, the employees had figured out that if we just save the answers from this year and just share them next year, that's easier than taking the test for real. And why wouldn't they? They were breaking the system. I expect that to happen. But it was still a lot of administration from my team. So one year when they came to me and said, we have to do the test, I said, yes, we do have to do the test. And I would like to take the questions from the test, rewrite them as scenario-based questions, and then, just pulse them out every once in a while, just to check in on people, see if they're remembering the information between exams, because the exam is very important. We did the exam. I then fired via email those questions, kind of like surveys a bit, at the employees every couple of weeks just to get a sense of what they were remembering. Fast forward a year, they came back, the subject matter experts, and they said, we need to do the exam. And I said, yes, we do need to do the exam. And I'd like to show you something. I've been collecting data about what people know, including people who didn't take the test last year because they were hired since then. I've been collecting this data. I can show you what they know about this information. It's very important, compliance. I just wanted to show you this information. And the subject matter expert said, what we could do? What if we did the pulse thing that you were doing? We didn't, because we get better data with that than we do like the once-a-year test. So we could do that instead. And I said, yes, we could do that. That is a great idea that I did not have at any point during this conversation. Yes, and like I said, fine line, influence, manipulation, everybody wins. So influence has to be a key part of our strategy to help people think differently, to evolve our function. Because like I said, we're having a conversation about mindset and belief just as much as we're having a conversation about learning strategy, tools, and tactics. So as we run out of time, and might have some time for additional questions. I don't know when Scott's throwing me out of here. That's my story when it comes to how do we shift mindsets of organizations, adapt our systems to bring that mindset to life, and then start to influence people to think differently. The final fact to leave you with is the fact that it's a long road to evolve people in the way they think. But what I have found to be true consistently is that organizations can only evolve and move as fast as people can learn. In order for an organization to take advantage of AI, to evolve their business model, to do whatever they're trying to do moving forward, they need their people to be able to come with them and be capable of doing what they need them to do. That means learning is a critical part of enabling an organization to execute. We have to find ways to evolve our tools, tactics, and practices so we can keep pace and deliver the right types of value. And it's not that we're leaving our legacy practices behind. We're simply evolving beyond and using those practices when it's the right thing to do, and leaning more into connection and curation and channels and enabling champions and these types of ideas that allow us, with our limited resources and limited time and limited budgets and limited tools, to bring a lot bigger value and ultimately help people do their best work every day. That's how we paint our own tunnels. in learning and development. It always comes back around to Wile E. Coyote. So that's my story. As I mentioned, this is all based on what's in my first book, The Modern Learning Ecosystem, which if you want to learn more about it, is available at the very real website, jdwroteabook.com. If you're wondering, is my next book, which publishes in May, available at the website jdwroteanotherbook.com? It is, because URLs are cheap when they're ridiculous. But if you have any questions now, happy to continue to chat. This is my contact information. Feel free to reach out anytime. If you hit the QR code, that's my LinkedIn. Like I said, I'm giving away a copy of the book next Friday. So just find that post on my LinkedIn, drop a comment, and you'll be one of the people I randomly select from to grab a copy of the book. But reach out anytime. Happy to help. Thanks so much for having me today. How can I help you? What questions or comments might you have before I go watch the Wicked movie?
JD, do you think you were showing us information?
In what?
I think he was. You think you're doing information sharing? You're very involved.
I don't see any. I've never seen any slides during this presentation.
Did other people see slides?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, Erwin, we saw a whole slide. There's a slide on right now of his contact information.
That would have been amazing if no one said anything for 60 minutes. And I was just saying in the middle of the picture, and everyone's like,
I've looked at speaker, gallery, and multi-speaker, and I don't see any slides.
I have good news, though, is that the deck is on my website. So if you're like, I want to catch up with those awesome visuals he was talking about, if you go to learngeek.co, the link's in the chat as well, on the presentations page, you'll find the modern learning mindset presentation. It's got all of the slides with some additional text on it that I talked through today. Sorry that you didn't see them. I'm not sure what's going on.
Yeah, me too.
Don't worry, Erwin. We recorded this so that we can.
Oh, that too.
You can watch the recording. We post it, I think, tomorrow or on Saturday, so you can catch with the slides. But that's
at double speed, so you don't even really have to listen to me. You can just be like, "That's a good visual. That's what he meant."
Hey. Yeah, I'd just like to say I found your presentation really refreshing. So thanks for that. I'm biased from the operations side as well. I come from that side, and I really like the way that you've kind of framed it. It certainly, I think in my experience, it allows you to have the latitude to do more and attack the problem from, multiple ways and not just training. So like I said, it's just refreshing to hear someone talking about it that way. And I don't know when we get to really make this shift for all L&D organizations, or what the time frame looks like, how that works, if it ever happens. But the fact that you're talking about it makes me hopeful.
Thank you. Like I said at the end, it is a journey. I mentioned that one example. It took me a year to get people to evolve past a particular mindset and tactic, but that's what it required. I find that the cool thing is when you're able to bring some of these tactics to life and help people solve some maybe small but meaningful problems, doors start to open. So I very rarely have success going top down and going into a presentation with an executive team and putting up the slide with those layers on it and saying, we're going to evolve our strategy. That's usually not the conversation. It's usually more about identifying what's a small problem for the right person, the right team, that I can use different approaches to solve, to get people to look in my direction and start saying, what else can you do? Yeah. Like I said, people previously looked at me as the e-learning guy. I was the voice in all the e-learning. People used to look at me strange in the elevator because they wouldn't know who I was. And I would say something and they would all turn because they had heard me so many times. So I've constantly kind of had to find ways to break people's predefined definitions of either my function or my team. And it usually comes down to helping the right people solve the right problems, but then being ready, because when it works, other people pick up on it and it starts to turn into movement. So you have to be ready for accelerating and kind of have the plan, but you don't always have to show everyone the plan, because sometimes plans feel complicated and people have a lot of things going on.
I just wanted to say thanks too. This was really informative and helpful. So thank you.
My pleasure. Happy to hang out.
And I think one of the valuable things is you kind of give us criteria to look at your own, almost a maturity model of how mature is your organization in changing and being different. Here's some characteristics, things to look for. What is in place and what's not in place. It's kind of thing. Are we in a legacy organization or an agile organization? And everybody says, "Oh, we want to be agile," and I'm like, "Well, let's look for some of the behaviors that show that we're agile and such." The Coast Guard's going through, that whole giant change because they just won the lottery. They got $25 billion after getting by with less. Now the Coast Guard is trying to figure out, now we have $25 billion to spend on this appropriations for this appropriation bill. How are we going to do it? And so some people are trying to figure out how to spend it fast because it might go away. And some people are trying to figure out, let's spend it on the right things. But that's another kind of a legacy organization that I'm involved with that now has to think about plan for the future. And now they have the money to do it, which is good. But just because it's like winning the lottery. Great. Now what are you going to do?
I've never been tasked with doing more with more. I don't have a particular strategy there. But the cool thing about the story that I told today in this framework and whatnot, I started presenting it 10 years ago. It was the first presentation I ever did in this industry. It was kind of the early version of this type of story in that framework. Didn't have cool colors yet, but it was the early version of the story. And I found that people just started gravitating to the idea, and something about the story clicked things together for people. And I started to see pictures of the slides places. And then the most recent discovery was someone commented with my name on LinkedIn, and it was in another language. And I used AI and translated what they said. And then I replied in the language that they used in the comment, because it's a fun thing that I can do now. And then they sent me a link. And the link was to a government website in their country. And it was the government's talent strategy for the following year. And I'm flipping through a PDF document that I can't understand because it's in a different language. And then all of a sudden, I see that 6-layer modern learning ecosystem framework show up. And that was the moment I went, huh, this government talent development entity that I've never heard of has adopted the framework for my presentations. That's neat. So it's been kind of an interesting journey over the past 10 years to watch people kind of grab pieces from this framework and this story and find ways to use it to ultimately just help us help people more effectively do their jobs. So yeah, it's been a neat journey. And that's why I'm always happy to share, because they never know what people take away from presentations. I don't expect anyone to be like, I'm doing all the slides. But even just a couple of ideas, if I find that something just snaps together where it's, oh, we can approach things a little bit differently or try this a little bit differently and unlock something that we've been trying to accomplish for a long time. Because like I said, we know a lot of this stuff, but it's how do we help other people kind of unlock the ability to bring it to life.
Any other questions or comments for JD?
How do you tackle the challenge that, in real life, there are thousands and thousands of different tasks and skills that people in like in a 2,000 person organization, you've got, 2,000 people, most of whom have different skills than the other people around. And so I agree with you that the learning department has to have access to lots of capability to find information or to help them find information. But how do you manage it in a world that's talking about being skill-based? How does the learning department manage that when there are literally these thousands of skills and the people asking for help don't know how to navigate through those thousands of skills?
I find, and it's kind of similar to what I said earlier around the fact that I don't believe anyone has ever gone back to an e-learning and looked up something, yet alone. A lot of learning management systems still don't let you go back into previous content in an easy way. I don't think people think in terms of skill. People who do whatever job every day. I don't think they sit there and think about what skills do I have and what skills do I need. I think it's nice to think that people think that way. I think it'd be great if people took a better accounting for and then connected skills to aspirational goals and work tasks and things like that. I think people think in terms of the job and the work. So the tasks they need to do, what they're being held accountable for, what they're being assigned in terms of work. And then I also think they think in terms of what they want to be, right? What's the next step? It's not that I want to improve my management skills. It's that I want to become the next assistant manager. How do I do that? So I think there's a shortcut there in terms of defining the work and then attaching resources to help people accomplish the work. And in the middle, yes, we're helping them develop different types of skills. But I think, I struggle with the idea of skills-based as opposed to task-based. Skills don't go away, but I think it's the way that we organize and scale what we do. I have had more success on the task side and the work side, as opposed to kind of the structured skill ontology taxonomy side of the conversation. And just to use an example, I use a lot of contact center examples because I spent 6 years in contact centers. One of the things that people were struggling with was people's first kind of introduction to the product. Like it was after they make the purchase and they start to, I'm being very vague, they start to use the product. That kind of first week or so of their membership, as it were, we struggle with people kind of staying on. And people came to me and said, well, we need to train people how to help people do this. And I quickly realized there was no one way, because when I asked the organization, okay, what's the right way? What's the SOP? What's the process for doing this? Every manager had an opinion, right? Every executive had an opinion. It turned into that situation where work was not clearly defined. So I was going to struggle to help people learn the right way and the associated skills to do it. So I went the other direction. I went out into the operation and found people who were good at it. Who was really good at retaining customers? Who was helping people through the first week of working with our organization? And I brought them into the office. I sat them in front of a camera and I asked them a couple of really short questions about how they did what they did. And what I really quickly discovered is they all did something different. The outcomes were the same, but the approach was different. So instead of trying to train people on the way, I just captured the best of the best and then shared their practices out into the organization in a more structured way. So it wasn't just information flying around. There was a way to connect the dots between, I'm struggling with this thing. There's a curated set of resources for this thing, and I can kind of mine my way through it and figure out, well, I can use a piece of this, piece of this, piece of this. I'll try this out. That's going to help me. So I find that when we connect our support to the tangible side of work, it's easier to connect the dots to the types of solutions that especially we can scale, rather than realizing, there are thousands of potential skills in an organization. There's only a few of us. We're either going to have to prioritize certain people and certain tasks and certain skills in certain departments, or we can figure out the systems approach and try to help more people accomplish more work and then narrow in on certain things when it's the right thing, it's the most complicated thing, it's the most important thing. And that's where we might go deep with a skill development program or something that's a more kind of structured approach to training. That's how I kind of look at that, as it were.
Thanks.
No problem.
Again, thanks everybody for joining. We'll let again reach out to JD on LinkedIn if you have any other further questions. If you'd like to be involved in running this ISPI Hampton Roads organization, reach out to me. We're always looking for officers or people just to volunteer and help with stuff. Our next session will be January 22nd. We won't have a session in December. Also reach out to me if you have somebody you'd like to hear from. You have a presenter or somebody you've heard at a conference or a book you've read or something like that. Let me know so I can book them. Usually it's a friend of a friend or I know somebody and they'll come on. I saw Meg was on. We should probably have Meg come back again because she's always full of great ideas. We've had her present in the past. So I'm like, oh, I should ask Meg to come do something in the future. So that's again, thanks for joining this. We'll send out a link to the recording when it's been posted on the YouTube account to everybody who was here and if all those people that missed it on our list. So again, thanks again, JD, for your time and your insights.
Thanks for having me. Thanks everybody for everything you do. Let me know how I can help. See you later.
Thanks, JD.
JD.